Hey everyone, it's Nightmare Vault. Tonight there are 8 new, most disturbing true Alaskan small town horror stories. These are real stories from workers who went to tiny Alaska towns for jobs, just regular people, janitors, mail carriers, store clerks. These towns only have a few thousand people and you can't drive there. Only planes or boats can reach them. In winter, it's dark all day and deadly cold. These workers thought they were just taking normal jobs that paid well, but they found out something was very wrong in these places. These stories are sourced from their final reports and messages. If you're new, subscribe for more true scary stories every night. Hit the bell too, turn off your lights. These 8 people took regular jobs in Alaska's smallest towns. But when you're that far from help in places nobody visits, bad things can happen. And once you start the job, you might not be able to leave. Let's begin. His name was Leo Vance, and he had been doing janitorial work for 8 years. He started right after high school when he couldn't afford college. He'd cleaned hospitals, office buildings, even a morgue once. You see some weird stuff working nights. People leave behind more than just trash when they think nobody's watching. But what happened during his 3 weeks at the Petersburg cannery changed everything he thought he knew about what's possible in this world. Some places aren't just haunted, they're hungry. He moved to Petersburg, Alaska in October 2023. It's a tiny fishing town, maybe 3,000 people if you count the seasonal workers. They call it Little Norway because half the families came over from Scandinavia generations ago. The whole place smelled like fish and diesel fuel, but it was honest work, and the pay was decent if you could handle the isolation. The job posting was simple: night janitor at Rosmo's and Sons Cannery, 1,000 p.m. to 600 a.m., $18 an hour. The building had been there since 1912, still running the same processing lines as his great-grandfather's time. Old brick walls, wooden floors worn smooth by a century of boots, and machinery that should have been replaced decades ago but somehow kept chugging along. His supervisor was an old Norwegian man named Olaf Jensen. He had been with the company for 43 years and knew every pipe and bolt in the place. The first night, Olaf walked him through the routine: mop the processing floor, clean the cutting stations, sanitize the conveyors, empty the trash, check the drains. Simple enough. Just remember, Olaf said as they stood in the main processing area. Don't look down the drains, just mop around them, empty the buckets, move on. Trust me on this one, Leo. He figured it was some safety thing, maybe sharp metal or dangerous chemicals. The floor drains were old cast iron, about a foot across, scattered throughout the processing area. They bubbled constantly, like something was breathing down there. Olaf said it was normal. Old building, weird plumbing, happened all the time. The first thing that struck him was how clean everything was. Spotless. The day shift processed thousands of pounds of salmon, but by the time he showed up, you'd think the machines had never been used. No blood, no scales, no fish guts anywhere. Even the smell was wrong. It should have reeked of dead fish, but it just smelled like emptiness. In the supply closet, he found cleaning products from the 1950s. The labels were faded, but the chemicals were still strong enough to burn your eyes. There was a logbook tucked behind a can of Lysol, handwritten entries dating back decades. Night Custodian 47, hired October 15th, lasted 3 weeks. Below that, Night Custodian 46, hired September 20th, lasted 2 weeks. The list went on and on. 47 names, all short-term employees. He was number 48. The first 2 nights went fine. Strange, but fine. He'd mop around those bubbling drains, clean equipment that was already clean, and count the hours until dawn. The building made noises at night. Old places do that. Settling wood, metal expanding and contracting, pipes gurgling. nothing he hadn't heard before. But on the third night, he dropped his keys down one of the drains. He had to look. He couldn't afford to lose those keys. They opened the building, the supply closets, everything. He shined his flashlight down the drain, expecting to see maybe 6 feet of pipe before it bent away. Instead, the light kept going and going, like the drain had no bottom. But that wasn't the weird part. At the very edge of his flashlight's range, he could see light coming from somewhere below. Not electric light, something older, like oil lamps or candles. And he could hear machinery running down there, different machinery than upstairs, slower, rhythmic, like breathing. He used the grabber tool from the supply closet to fish out his keys. When he pulled them up, there were extras. Old brass keys he'd never seen before, rusted and worn smooth. They were still on his ring like they'd always been there. Curiosity killed the cat, but he was still alive. He tried those keys on doors he'd never noticed before. Behind the main processing line, there was a door painted the same color as the wall. One of the old keys fit perfectly. The room behind it was impossible. Another processing line, identical to the main floor, but running backwards. Fish parts were moving up the conveyor belt, assembling themselves into whole salmon. The reassembled fish were alive, swimming through the air like it was water, moving through the walls back toward the ocean. He stood there for maybe 20 minutes, watching dead fish put themselves back together. Every logical part of his brain was screaming that this couldn't be happening. But there it was, right in front of him. He found another door and another key fit. This room had workers in it, dozens of them from different time periods, all working at once. Men in 1920s overalls, women in 1960s hairnets, guys in modern uniforms. They couldn't see each other, just worked through each other like ghosts occupying the same space but in different times. The drain bubbling got worse after that. The water, if it was water, started overflowing. It was too thick, too dark, and it moved against gravity. It crept up the walls and formed temporary shapes, hands, faces, things that almost looked human but weren't quite right. Behind the supply closet, he found a service ladder leading down through the floor. The building blueprints didn't show any basement, but there it was. He climbed down into what he could only call the lower cannery. Everything was identical to upstairs but reversed. Left was right. All the text was backwards. Even the workers moved in reverse, walking backwards, talking backwards, living their entire shifts in rewind. The machinery ran backwards, too, uncanning fish, removing labels, reforming the creatures piece by piece. But these fish weren't normal. Too many eyes, human teeth, fingers instead of fins, things that had never swum in any ocean. That's when he understood. The upper cannery canned fish. The lower cannery uncanned them. An endless cycle connected by the drain system, circulating the same biomass up and down forever. Nothing ever really died. Nothing was ever really created, just transformed, processed, reprocessed. He found employee records down there. The same names were repeated every generation, the same faces in photographs spanning decades. The Jensens had been working here since 1912, the Andersons since 1924, the Vances, his family, since 1961. They weren't employees, they were part of the machine. The smell from the drains was getting stronger every night, rotting fish mixed with something alive, something aware. He started feeling weak during his shifts, dizzy, like he was fading somehow. One night, he looked in the bathroom mirror and could see right through himself. The machines were processing him, not all at once, but gradually, bit by bit, dissolving him into the same dark liquid that bubbled up from the drains. By the fifth night, he only existed from 1000 p.m. to 600 a.m. During the day, he just wasn't, nowhere, nothing. Reformed each night to clean, dissolved again at dawn, He tried to quit, but you can't quit when you only exist 8 hours a day. During business hours, when the office was open, he didn't exist to hand in his resignation. He was already too processed. The whole town operated this way. Day people and night people, never fully real. The cannery is the heart, pumping existence through the drain system like blood, rationing reality to keep everyone functioning just enough to do their jobs. He learned what happened to the night custodians who quit after a few weeks. They didn't quit. They got fully processed, became permanent fixtures in the building's infrastructure. Olaf wasn't just an old employee. His consciousness was spread through the concrete foundation, aware, but unable to move or die. He could still talk because his voice was built into the building itself. The fish they canned weren't fish. They were fragments of people, memories made flesh. Every can of Petersburg salmon contained someone's dreams, fears, hopes, compressed and sealed. The labels didn't lie, it really was wild caught. Wild caught human experience, processed and shipped to grocery stores across the country. One night, the upper machinery turned on by itself. There were no fish on the belts, but it was processing something. Shadows, dark shapes being cut, cleaned, and canned like fish. The labels read, premium darkness, wild caught void, sustainably sourced nothing. These cans disappeared by morning, shipped somewhere else, but no shipping records existed. The backwards cannery below was trying to rebuild them from the cans, but it always got the reconstruction wrong. Too many eyes, human teeth, fingers instead of fins. They were being recycled imperfectly, generation after generation, getting a little more wrong each time. He found the main drain in the basement, a massive chamber where all of Petersburg's drains connected. The town's dissolved residents, a soup of consciousness and memory, circulated through pipes beneath their feet. Every sink, every shower, every toilet connected to this central processing system. The night he discovered the main chamber, he also found the truth about the town itself. Petersburg isn't just a fishing village, it's a processing plant. The fish industry is just the cover story. What they really harvest is human essence, packaged and distributed to, he didn't know where. Somewhere that needs what they used to be. He had been cleaning this cannery for 3 weeks now. Every night, the same routine. Mop around the drains, clean equipment that cleans itself, exist just enough to maintain the illusion. The morning dissolves him. The evening rebuilds him, always a little less than before. If you've ever eaten Petersburg salmon, you've tasted them. They're in every can. The fishermen who caught them, the processors who cleaned them, the night janitors who maintained the system, all of them, dissolved and reformed and canned and shipped. Sometimes he saw new employees during his shift, day workers who stayed late, security guards, other night staff. He wanted to warn them, but his words just came out as bubbles floating up to join the processing system. Soon they'd be like him. Part-time people existing just enough to keep the machines running. The drains were bubbling louder tonight. Something big was being processed. Maybe the whole town, finally. Maybe the last of the real people were being dissolved into the system. Soon there would be nothing left but the cannery running on its own, processing shadows into darkness, shipping emptiness to the world above. Don't trust the labels, they're the catch. They're what's being canned. And if you've tasted them, part of you is already dissolving, already becoming part of the system, already starting to exist only part-time. The 600 a.m. whistle was about to blow, time for him to dissolve again until tonight. Time to become nothing until the cannery needs him to exist. Just remember, don't look in the drains, don't drop your keys, don't use the extra keys you find. And whatever you do, don't eat the salmon. They're still in there, still aware, still trying to warn you from inside the cans. But you probably won't listen. Nobody ever does. That's how the cannery keeps running. That's how it keeps processing. That's how they all end up dissolved, canned, and shipped away from themselves forever. The whistle was blowing now. Time to go, time to become nothing again. He would be back tonight, if there was still enough of him left to see anything at all. Her name was Alina Reyes, and she had been a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service for 4 years. She started working regular routes in Anchorage, delivering to neighborhoods where the biggest challenge was icy sidewalks and the occasional aggressive dog. She thought she understood what postal work meant, bringing people their letters, packages, and medicine, connecting families across distances. But when she transferred to Bethel, Alaska, in January 2022, she learned that some mail routes go to places that shouldn't exist. Bethel sits in the middle of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, home to about 6,300 people. It's the hub for dozens of tiny villages scattered across the tundra. There are no roads connecting it to anywhere else. Everything comes and goes by plane or boat. Her job was simple: sort packages at the main post office, load them onto small aircraft, and fly with bush pilots to deliver mail to 56 surrounding villages. Most of these places have fewer than 100 people living there. The pay was good, better than her Anchorage route, and she liked the idea of helping isolated communities get their medicine, food, and letters from family. These villages depended on them completely. Without mail delivery, they'd be cut off from the world. Her first month was exactly what she expected. She'd arrive at the post office at 600 in the morning, scan packages into the tracking system, organize them by destination, and load them into the cargo areas of Cessnas and Piper Cubs. The pilots knew every village by heart: Napaskiak, Akiak, Chiluksak, places with names she had to practice pronouncing. They'd fly low over endless white tundra, land on frozen rivers or tiny airstrips, deliver the mail, and fly back. It was routine work, peaceful even. Then she started noticing packages addressed to villages that weren't on any map. The first time she saw one, she thought it was a mistake. The address read Shadows, Alaska, in neat handwriting. She'd never heard of it, and it wasn't on her delivery list. When she asked her supervisor about it, the woman just shrugged and said some villages had old names or were unofficial settlements. "Silas will know where it goes," she told Alina, pointing to one of their most experienced pilots. Silas Croft, no relation, despite the similar name, had been flying mail routes in Alaska for 23 years. He was a quiet man with weathered hands and eyes that had seen everything the wilderness could throw at him. When Alina showed him the package, he nodded and took it without explanation. "Load these in the special section," he said, pointing to a separate area of the cargo hold. "I handle those deliveries myself." Over the next few weeks, more packages appeared with similar addresses: Nunivak Void, Timeline Junction, north of Forgotten Creek. The return addresses looked normal: Amazon warehouses, stores in Anchorage, families from the lower 48. But the recipient names were strange: the keeper of Kuselvac, Void Walker 7, the Timeline Mender. What bothered her most was the weight. Every single one of these mysterious packages weighed exactly 17 pounds. It didn't matter if it was a shoebox or something the size of a small refrigerator. When she lifted it onto the scale, the digital display always read 17 pounds. She started checking the tracking numbers, but they didn't exist in the system. These packages were invisible to the USPS database. Silas wouldn't talk about them. Whenever she asked, he'd just say it was part of an old agreement and change the subject. But she could see him getting tense every time they loaded the special packages. His jaw would clench, and he'd double-check their fuel levels like he was preparing for a much longer flight than usual. On February 15th, Alina convinced Silas to let her ride along on one of his special deliveries. She told him she needed to learn all the routes in case she had to substitute for him someday. He didn't look happy about it, but he agreed. They loaded 8 regular packages for a kiak and 3 special packages bound for places she'd never heard of. Silas performed his usual pre-flight inspection, but she noticed him checking systems twice. He seemed nervous, which wasn't like him at all. They took off at 1,000 in the morning under overcast skies. The flight to a kiak took 40 minutes over familiar territory, frozen rivers, scattered buildings, the occasional dog team. They delivered the regular mail without incident, refueled, and then Silas turned the plane north. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked through the headset. "You'll see," was all he said. They flew north over empty tundra for over an hour. She kept checking the GPS, but they were heading into areas marked as uninhabited wilderness. No villages, no airstrips, no landmarks of any kind, just endless white snow stretching to the horizon. "Silas, there's nothing out here," she said, starting to worry about their fuel consumption. "There will be," he replied and started descending. She looked down and saw absolutely nothing. No buildings, no people, no sign of human presence anywhere. They were descending toward flat, empty tundra that stretched for miles in every direction. Then, as they got closer to the ground, structures began to appear. Not like they were hidden by snow or camouflaged, they literally materialized as they descended. First, a few small buildings flickered into view like a television tuning into a channel. Then more appeared until she could see an entire village laid out below them, complete with houses, storage buildings, and what looked like a community center. But something was wrong with the architecture. The buildings were too tall for an Alaskan village, stretching upward at angles that hurt to look at directly. The roofs didn't sit right on the walls, and the windows were positioned in ways that made no geometric sense. It was like someone had built a village from memory, but had gotten all the proportions wrong. Silas landed on what appeared to be a packed snow runway, though she hadn't seen it until they were almost touching down. As soon as they came to a stop, people began walking toward the plane. From a distance, they looked normal. Men and women in parkas and winter boots, just like you'd see in any Alaska village, but as they got closer, she realized something was off about their faces. They were too symmetrical, too perfect. Every feature was exactly where it should be, but somehow that made them look completely wrong. All of them were the exact same height. All of them walked in perfect synchronization. When one turned their head to look at something, they all turned their heads at exactly the same moment, like they were sharing one mind. "Don't stare," Silas whispered. "Just help me unload." The villagers, if that's what they were, approached the plane in a perfect line. They didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge them as individuals. They simply took the packages Silas handed them, signed receipts with identical handwriting, and walked away in formation. In return, they loaded packages into the plane. Same size variety, same perfect 17 pounds weight for each one. The return addresses were for real villages she knew: Bethel, Akiak, Napaskiak. But when she glanced at the recipient names, they were people she recognized: the post office clerk, the man from the weather station, the clinic nurse. "Silas," she whispered, "these are going to people we know." "Don't open them," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Don't scan them, just deliver them. It's part of the agreement." They finished loading in complete silence. The villagers stood in a perfect line, watching them with their two perfect faces. Not one of them moved or spoke until they were back in the plane and taxiing for takeoff. As they climbed into the sky, Elena looked back at the village. It was already fading, becoming transparent until it disappeared completely. By the time they reached their cruising altitude, there was nothing below them but empty tundra again. "What the hell was that place?" she asked. Silas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Somewhere that isn't supposed to exist, but it does. And we have to keep it that way." When they got back to Bethel, she couldn't resist checking one of the return packages. She scanned it into the system while Silas was in the bathroom. The tracking number came up, but the delivery date showed 50 years ago. The recipient, according to the computer, had received this exact package in 1972. She scanned another one. The system showed a delivery date of 2077 to someone who hadn't been born yet, at an address that didn't exist. That night, she took one of the smaller packages home. She knew she wasn't supposed to, but she had to know what was inside something that weighed 17 pounds but could fit in a shoebox. She opened it carefully with a box cutter. Inside, there was nothing visible, just empty space. But when she reached inside, her hand touched something with weight and substance. Even though she couldn't see anything there, the nothing, she didn't know how else to describe it, started spreading up her arm. Not cold, not warm, just absent. As it climbed toward her shoulder, she started seeing things, visions of places that existed between other places. Empty spaces in the world where things that shouldn't be could hide and wait. She saw the truth about those villages. They exist in the spaces between our reality and somewhere else. The post office has been keeping them separate for decades, using the mail route as a barrier. If they stop delivering to them, they merge with our world, replacing real villages, real people. The 17 pounds isn't random. It's the exact weight needed to anchor them in their dimension, to keep them from drifting into Iors. She jerked her hand out of the package and the feeling stopped, but the knowledge remained. They weren't just delivering mail to isolated villages. They were feeding something that should stay hungry. Over the next few weeks, she started recognizing names on the packages going to regular villages. People who'd gone missing over the years, presumed dead in the wilderness. They were living in the between villages, and they were ordering things from our world. Each package delivered to them pulled them slightly closer to our reality. By March, the special deliveries had doubled. They were taking 60 packages daily to places that didn't exist, and real villages started reporting strange visitors. People walking out of the tundra, claiming to be relatives but looking wrong, too young or too old, features blurred like an old photograph. An elder in a kiak pulled her aside during a delivery. "The old agreement is breaking," he said. "They want to trade places with us." She found a manifest from 1971 in the post office files. The first special delivery was dated the same year as an underground nuclear test in the area. The test didn't create a crater, it punched a hole between dimensions and things leaked through. The Postal Service made a deal, they deliver to them and they stay in their dimension. Everyone stays safe, but they weren't just delivering packages. Each delivery traded a small piece of our reality for a piece of theirs. Bethel started changing. Buildings appeared overnight that she could swear weren't there the day before, streets that led nowhere, people who looked familiar, but she couldn't place where she'd met them. The nowhere villages were overlapping with the real ones, a gradual invasion disguised as a mail route. On April 1st, she showed up for work and found a different building. Same address, but the interior was laid out wrong. Her coworkers were people she didn't recognize, but they knew her name, knew her history, acted like they'd worked together for years. They showed her photos from company parties she'd never attended. But there she was in the pictures, smiling next to people she'd never met. The nowhere villages had partially merged with theirs, creating false history, false memories, false people. The real Alina Reyes was somewhere in the between space, and she was her replacement from nowhere. But somehow she remembered being real. Silas was gone, replaced by a pilot who looked identical but spoke backwards unless he concentrated hard on forming words correctly. He pretended not to notice when he said things like morning good instead of good morning. Packages started arriving addressed to her, at addresses she'd never lived at, from people she'd never met. When she opened them, they contained pieces of her life from another dimension. Photographs of her as a child in places she'd never been, letters from family members she didn't have. Personal belongings she'd never owned but somehow recognized. She realized that everyone in Bethel was being slowly replaced, package by package, delivery by delivery. The post office wasn't delivering mail anymore. It was delivering replacements for all of them. She's still working the routes. She can't stop. Something compels her to keep loading those planes, to keep flying to places that shouldn't exist. But she doesn't know if she's the real Alina Reyes or the replacement. The packages keep coming. Reality keeps shifting, and Bethel isn't Bethel anymore. Sometimes she catches glimpses of the real town in reflections in windows or in photographs that change when she's not looking at them directly. The real people are still there, somewhere in the between space, probably wondering why their mail carrier looks like someone they used to know but can't quite remember. If you ever take a job with the Postal Service in a remote area, pay attention to packages that don't scan into the system. Check the weights carefully. And if you find yourself delivering to places that aren't on any map, don't ask questions. Don't look too closely at the recipients, because some agreements are too old and too dangerous to break, even when you realize you might not be real enough to make that choice anymore. The mail must go through, even when it's delivering pieces of reality to places that shouldn't exist, even when the return address is somewhere you used to be real. Her name was Chloe Bennett, and she had been working retail for 4 years. She started at Target in Seattle right out of high school, then moved to a Walmart in Spokane before ending up here. She had dealt with angry customers, shoplifters, and even a robbery attempt. She thought she'd seen everything retail could throw at her. But what happened during her night shifts at AC Value Center in Sitka, Alaska, changed everything she thought she knew about the places we work. Sometimes the real horror isn't the customers, it's the store itself. She was 22 and moved to Sitka in October 2024 because her boyfriend got a job on a fishing boat. Sitka's weird. It's on Baranof Island with about 8,500 people, and it rains maybe 300 days a year. Everything comes in by barge because there are no roads connecting it to anywhere else. It's beautiful but isolated in a way that gets to you after a while. AC Value Center was hiring, and they offered her the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Extra $4 an hour hazard pay, they called it. She figured hazard pay meant dealing with drunk fishermen buying chips at 3 a.m., not whatever came later. The store was the only 24-hour place in town, an old building from 1974 with those buzzing fluorescent lights that never shut up. It seemed like the perfect job for an introvert like her. Empty store, no customers to deal with, just mop floors and stock shelves. Her manager, Doris, was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who'd been there since the store opened. She gave Chloe the basic rundown: restock from the delivery pallets, clean the floors, help the occasional customer, and call her if anything major happened. The first week was peaceful. She'd put in her earbuds, stock toilet paper and canned goods, and help the random drunk guy find his favorite brand of chips. The work was easy, the pay was decent for Sitka, and she liked being alone with her thoughts. Then, on Wednesday of her second week, she found products on the shelves she hadn't stocked. At first, she thought maybe the day shift had put out some returns or Doris had come in early to stock something special. But these weren't returns. They were brand new items, still with the shipping plastic on them. The weird thing was, they were almost right, but not quite. Instead of Pepsi, there were cans of something called Crest Cola. Same red and blue logo style, but the can was dark green. When she checked the security footage the next morning, she found something that made her skin crawl. At exactly 4:17 a.m., the camera showed an empty shelf. In the very next frame, the Crest Cola was there, no transition, no person stocking it. Empty shelf, then full shelf. She asked Doris about it when she came in at 7. The manager barely looked up from her coffee. "Oh, that happens sometimes," she said. "Shipping companies make mistakes, send us off-brand stuff that's close enough, just mark it down and put it out. Customers never complain." But customers did buy these items, and that's when things got really strange. Chloe started paying attention and documenting everything. Every single night, exactly 23 new items appeared at 4:17 a.m. Always food products, always almost but not quite versions of real brands. Wonder Bread became Wonder Bread, Cheerios became Cheeries. Small changes that were easy to miss unless you were looking for them. The customers who bought these items were strange, too. They only bought the fake products, nothing else. They paid an exact change, never made small talk, and they all parked in the same spot, parking space number 13. They walked the exact same path through the store every time, picked up their items, paid, and left. They never spoke except to say thank you in the same flat tone. One night she followed a customer outside. It was a middle-aged woman in a rain jacket who'd bought 3 cans of something called Camp Bull's soup. The woman walked to parking space 13, got to where her car should be, and then just stepped sideways into nothing. Not into darkness, not around a corner. She stepped sideways into the space between the light poles and simply stopped existing. Chloe ran over to check. There was nothing there. No car, no woman, just empty pavement and the sound of rain. The money they paid with felt wrong, too. The bills were too smooth, like they'd never been folded or wrinkled. All the serial numbers were sequential, and they were all dated 1987, which made no sense. She tried one of the products herself, the Wonder Bread. The moment she swallowed a bite, she felt disconnected from her body for hours, like she was watching herself stock shelves from outside her own head. It was terrifying, and she threw the rest away. That's when she started digging deeper. She found the store's original blueprints in Doris's office. AC Value Center was built right over the original Russian cemetery from 1804. The cemetery was supposed to be moved when they built the store, but she did some research at the library. Ground-penetrating radar from a 1990s survey showed over 400 bodies still buried beneath the building. The night customers started recognizing her after that. One whispered, "Chloe from the better store," while buying something called Camp Bull's soup. Another one said, "You're so much younger here," in a voice that sounded sad and hollow. Then the products started getting personal. Items appeared with employee names on them. Chloe's last meal pasta with an ingredients list that included regret and missed opportunities. Dylan's dinner rolls. Dylan was the day shift cashier. Marcus's meat sauce. Marcus worked produce. She mapped where all these fake products appeared, and they formed a perfect spiral pattern through the store. Everything led toward the freezer aisle in the back. In the freezer, behind the normal frozen foods, she found products that made her blood turn cold. Milk cartons with photos of missing Sitka residents on the sides. People who'd vanished over the years, a fisherman from 2018, a teacher from 2020, a teenager from last summer. Their faces were on cartons labeled "Missing Person Milk," and their eyes seemed to follow her as she moved. At 4:17 a.m. on a Friday night, she saw how the products appeared. The air split like tearing fabric, creating a gap about 3 feet wide. Through that gap, she could see another version of Sitka. The buildings were different colors, the cars were older models, and everyone moved in reverse, walking backward, talking with words coming out before they opened their mouths. In that other store, through the tear in reality, she saw herself. But she was older, grayer, wearing a manager's name tag. The other Chloe looked directly at her and mouthed the words, "Don't let them complete the spiral." Then the tear closed, and she was alone again with 23 new, impossible products. The situation got worse fast. The next night, 46 products appeared. The night after that, 92. The fake items were doubling each time, taking over entire aisles. During the day, her coworkers started finding notes in their lockers written in their own handwriting, but none of them remembered writing them. Stop coming to work. The store is feeding. We're the products now. All were dated a week in the future. The day shift customers started shopping in reverse, too. They'd walk backward through the aisles, take items off the shelves, and put them back in their carts, then leave with empty carts and somehow pay negative amounts on their receipts. The freezer aisle started extending itself. It had been maybe 20 feet long when she started working there. Now it was 40 feet, then 60, growing longer each night. The temperature was dropping throughout the entire store, and she had to wear her coat during her shifts. She found herself in security footage she didn't remember. There she was, stocking shelves on her nights off, smiling wrong, too wide, too long, like someone else was wearing her face. The other employees reported the same thing. They were all working shifts they'd never signed up for, with no memory of being there. The cash registers started printing receipts for purchases from decades ago, 1987, 1963, 1804, going backward in time. The dates got older each night, like the store was reaching further and further into the past. The fluorescent lights began pulsing in rhythm with something underground. If you put your ear to the floor, you could hear it, a slow, steady heartbeat coming from beneath the building. That's when she understood. The store wasn't built on a cemetery. The store was the cemetery. It was feeding on them, on the customers, on everyone who entered. The buried bodies from 1804 were still down there, still working, stocking an underground store that mirrored the one above. She tried to quit. She called Doris and told her she was done, not coming back. But she kept waking up at work anyway, mid-shift, with no memory of driving there. Her car would be in the parking lot, her time card punched in, the register drawer open and waiting for her. The two realities were merging. Customers from both versions of Sitka were shopping at the same time, passing through each other like ghosts. The fake products now included items like employee paste, with ingredients listed as Chloe, 22, Dylan, 19, Marcus, 34, still fresh. The freezer aisle had grown so long it reached the back exit, blocking it completely. The temperature throughout the store was now below freezing. Her breath came out in clouds, and ice was forming on the shelves. The night customers finally told her the truth. They were them, the employees from the other Sitka where they'd never escaped. The store existed in multiple realities, harvesting workers from each one, selling them to versions of themselves from other worlds. She found the source under register number 3, a wooden trapdoor that led down to the original cemetery. The bodies down there were still moving, still stocking shelves in an underground store that had been operating since 1804. They couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, had been working the night shift for over 200 years. She made a decision. She grabbed bottles of bleach and ammonia from the cleaning supplies and poured them over the spiral pattern the fake products had made throughout the store. The chemical reaction tore reality completely open. Both versions of Sitka became visible at the same time, and she could see the other employees trapped in their endless shifts. She ran through the tier into what she hoped was the better reality, the one where the cemetery had actually been moved, where the store was just a normal grocery store. She made it through just as the tier sealed behind her. But she's not safe. This Sitka looks the same, but she's been watching AC Value Center. Last week, she saw a job posting for night shift workers. Extra $4 an hour hazard pay. And yesterday, she noticed they have a new product on the shelves. Something called Crest Cola in dark green cans. The spiral is starting again. It always starts again. Somewhere in some other reality, she's still there, stocking shelves at 417 a.m., getting older and grayer, wearing a manager's name tag. If you ever take a night shift job anywhere, pay attention to the products. If brands start appearing that are almost right but not quite, if customers pay with bills that are too smooth, if you find yourself working shifts you don't remember, run. Run before you become part of the spiral. Because once the store starts feeding, there's only one way out, and you might not like the reality you end up in. His name was Arthur Finch, and he had been working as a janitor for 12 years. He started right after high school, working at hospitals and office buildings across the lower 48. He had cleaned up blood, vomit, and things he didn't like to think about. He'd worked double shifts during flu seasons, cleaned crime scenes when the police were done, and mopped floors during medical emergencies. He thought he'd seen everything a janitor could see. But what happened in January 2020 at Norton Sound Regional Hospital in Nome, Alaska, changed everything he thought he knew about temperature, time, and reality itself. He moved to Nome to escape a bad divorce. His ex-wife took everything. He needed a fresh start somewhere nobody knew him. The hospital job came with good benefits and free housing, a small apartment right in town. Nome has about 3,800 people and sits right on the Bering Sea, famous for the gold rush back in the day. What he didn't know was that Nome was famous for something else now, something the tourist books don't mention. His first day was January 15th, 2020. The temperature outside was 30 degrees F, typical for an Alaska winter. But when he walked into the hospital lobby, he stopped dead. There were 47 thermometers mounted on the walls, not one or two 47. Digital ones, old mercury ones, fancy electronic displays, even some that looked handmade. And every single one showed a different temperature. One read minus 40 degrees. The one next to it showed plus 72 degrees. Another displayed plus 2,000 degrees, which should have melted the wall. One in the corner was showing symbols that weren't even numbers, just strange marks that hurt to look at. The other weird thing was that everyone who worked there carried their own personal thermometer. Nurses, doctors, orderlies, even the receptionist. They'd check them constantly, like some people check their phones. And they all dressed according to whatever their thermometer said, not what the weather actually was. His supervisor, Helen, showed him around that first day. She was wearing a heavy parka with fur trim, winter boots, and thick gloves. He was sweating in just a t-shirt and jeans. They were standing in the same room at the same moment, but she was shivering while he was wiping sweat from his forehead. "Don't look so confused," she said, her breath coming out in visible puffs, even though he felt like he was in a sauna. "You'll understand soon enough. Since 1995, Nome exists in multiple temperature realities. The trick is to pick one thermometer and stick to it. Whatever temperature it shows, that's your reality." He laughed, thinking it was some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy. "Come on, Helen, temperature is temperature. It's the same for everyone." She got serious real quick. "Arthur, I'm going to say this once, and you better listen good. Walk over to that wall and touch 2 different thermometers at the same time, but be ready for what happens." He figured he'd humor her. He walked over to the wall and put his left hand on a thermometer reading 40 degrees and his right hand on one showing plus 90 degrees. The second he touched both of them, pain shot through his body like lightning. His left hand froze solid instantly. Ice crystals formed on his fingers and he couldn't move them. At the exact same time, his right hand started burning. The skin turned red, then started blistering like he'd grabbed a hot stove. Same body, same person, 2 completely different realities happening at once. He yanked his hands away, screaming. Helen helped him to the employee break room where she had a medical kit ready like this happened all the time. "Now you understand," she said, treating his frostbite and burns simultaneously. "Welcome to Nome, Population 3,800, existing in about 50 different temperature zones at any given moment. The hospital had a whole ward dedicated to what they called temperature-confused patients, people who got caught between realities or couldn't stick to just one thermometer reading. He saw a man whose top half was suffering from hypothermia while his legs had heat stroke. His torso was blue and shivering, but his feet were swollen and red from overheating. There was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old when he first saw her, but her hands looked 40 years old, wrinkled, spotted with age. Her feet were tiny, like a 3-year-old's. Helen explained that the temperature you experience controls how fast time passes for you. Colder zones age you slower. Hot zones speed everything up. In the basement, he found people who'd been in Nome since 1995, when this all started, but they'd only aged 5 years because they stuck to freezing temperatures. They looked almost exactly like they did 25 years ago. But in other rooms, he met people who had aged 50 years in just the past 5, dying of old age in their 30s because they chose hot thermometer readings. The hospital basement was off limits to cleaning staff, but he had never been good at following rules. One night, he snuck down there with his mop bucket as cover. He found a massive hole in the concrete floor, maybe 20 feet across. When he shined his flashlight down, he could see different time periods at different depths. 10 feet down looked like 1995. He could see old computers and furniture that matched the decade. 20 feet down was clearly the 1960s, all wood paneling and rotary phones. 30 feet down looked like the 1800s, all rough wood and oil lamps. The deeper it went, the further back in time it showed. And the hole was breathing, actually breathing like a living thing. Each breath exhaled different temperatures from different time periods all at once. Hot air from what looked like prehistoric times, freezing gusts from the Ice Age, temperate breezes from times he couldn't even identify. That's when he realized this wasn't just about temperature. This was about time itself breaking apart in Nome. Things got worse after that. He started noticing his reflection was wrong in the men's room mirror. Sometimes he looked older, sometimes younger, depending on which thermometer reading his body was unconsciously following. When he got angry, the temperature around him spiked to 100 degrees. When he was scared, it dropped to -60 degrees. His coworker Daniel was the first to disappear from his reality. He got stuck in the -20 degrees zone and became invisible to anyone experiencing warmer temperatures. They could hear him screaming for help, begging them to see him, but he just wasn't there anymore. His locker still had his stuff, his time card still got punched, but none of them could see or touch him. The hospital's patient records started showing people admitted from futures that hadn't happened yet. A woman came in with injuries from a car accident scheduled for next Tuesday. She kept talking about events that were supposed to happen tomorrow, next week, next month. Then he found his own medical records, multiple versions. In one, he died at age 34 from hypothermia. In another, he died at 45 from heat stroke. A third showed him dying at 67 from old age, and a fourth had him dying at 31 next week from something called temporal displacement syndrome. He realized why the locals stick to one thermometer. Seeing all your possible deaths laid out like that drives you insane. Every choice you make about temperature determines which death you get when it happens, how much of your life you actually get to live. The hole in the basement started getting stronger. It began pulling people in, literally sucking them into different time periods. Those pulled into cold zones emerged in Nome's past. Those dragged into hot zones got shot into the future. The hospital started losing staff, not to quitting, but to time itself. He found a diary in the archives from 1897 written in handwriting he recognized immediately. It was his. He'd been pulled back over a century, lived an entire life as a prospector during the gold rush, and died in 1923, all before he was even born in 1989. The past him had left the diary knowing the future him would find it, but that wasn't the strangest part. Future versions of him had left messages carved into hospital walls, warnings about specific dates. December 15th, 2020, don't go to work. December 18th, she's not who she seems. December 25th, you die today. December 15th came and he didn't go to work. He stayed in his apartment all day, doors locked. But when he woke up on December 16th, he was at the hospital anyway. The past him had gone to work, creating a paradox. He'd experienced not going to work, but he'd also experienced going to work, both at the same time. That's when he met the other versions of himself. 7 of them, all from different temperature zones. They were all janitors, all divorced, all made the same life choices, but they'd aged differently depending on their thermometer readings. The oldest looked 89 years old because he'd been living in the plus 89 degrees zone. The youngest looked about 20, stuck in a hot zone that reversed his aging. "We're not different people," the oldest version explained. "We're the same person split across different realities. Every person in Nome is actually one of only about 50 real people. But there are thousands of versions of us existing in different temperature zones." The hole wasn't a hole at all. It was the spot where reality couldn't decide which timeline was real, so it kept all of them running at the same time. December 18th, he figured out what "she's not who she seems" meant. His ex-wife showed up at the hospital. She'd tracked him down, come to Nome to work things out. But she existed in a plus 90 degrees reality while he was experiencing plus 55 degrees. They could barely see each other, like looking through thick fog. She was aging rapidly in her hot zone, going from 30 years old to 80 in just 3 days. He tried to pull her into his temperature zone, but it split her apart. Part of her stayed old, while another part reversed back to being an infant. Both versions of her existed at the same time in the same space. The hospital stopped admitting new patients. How do you treat someone when half their body is freezing and half is burning? How do you take vital signs when a person's heart exists in 3 different time periods at once? On December 25th, all 7 versions of him tried to meet in the same place at the same temperature. The convergence killed 6 of him, but he absorbed all their memories, their experiences, their deaths. Now he exists in all temperature zones at the same time. He's aging and dying and being born constantly, experiencing every possible version of his life all at once. He can see Nome the way it really is now. It's not a town anymore. It's a temporal wound that won't heal. And they're all bleeding through it into different realities, different times, different versions of themselves that should never exist together. He still works at the hospital. All versions of him do, across all the temperature zones. Sometimes he's 25, sometimes he's 90, sometimes he hasn't been born yet. The tourists still come for the gold rush history, but they never stay long. Something about the temperature feels wrong to them, even if they can't put their finger on what it is. If you ever find yourself in Nome and you see those thermometers everywhere, don't touch more than one at a time. Pick your temperature and stick to it. Don't look too deep into mirrors. Don't trust the clocks, and whatever you do, stay away from the hospital basement. The hole is still there, still breathing, still pulling people into times they don't belong. Nome exists in 50 different realities now, maybe more. And somewhere in those realities, some version of you is already here, has always been here, will always be here, aging at the speed of whatever temperature you choose to believe in. Time isn't linear in Nome. Neither is temperature, neither is life or death or anything else you thought you could count on. And the scary thing is, he's starting to think Nome isn't the only place like this. He's starting to think reality is a lot more fragile than any of us ever imagined. His name was Owen Gray, and he had been working in wildlife management for Alaska Fish and Game for 6 years. He started right out of college with a biology degree, thinking he'd spend his time tracking bears or studying caribou herds. Instead, he became what they call a fish counter. It sounds boring, but it's actually crucial work. Every salmon that swims up Alaska's rivers gets counted during spawning season. These numbers determine fishing quotas, conservation efforts, and tribal harvesting rights. One miscounted season can affect an entire ecosystem. He had counted fish on 12 different rivers across Alaska. The Kenai during the King's Salmon Run, the Copper River for sockeye. He even spent a brutal winter counting steelhead on the Sidduk. He had worked through bear encounters, equipment failures, and whether that would make most people quit. His supervisor always said he was reliable, the guy who'd stick it out when others packed up and left. But what happened in May 2021 on the Copper River near Cordova changed everything he thought he knew about his job. Some things in Alaska aren't meant to be counted. The assignment came up suddenly. Elias Vance, the regular counter for the Cordova station, had quit mid-season. He had just packed up after 2 weeks and driven his truck straight to the airport, leaving behind all his gear, his notes, everything. The regional office needed someone experienced to finish the count, and Owen volunteered. Cordova pays double because it's so remote, only 2,200 people, accessible only by plane or boat, surrounded by glaciers and endless rain. The job itself was straightforward. Sit in a wooden tower platform 18 miles upriver from town, watch salmon swim upstream, and click a mechanical hand counter for each one. During peak season, he should be seeing 8,000 to 12,000 fish daily. The tower overlooked a narrow section where the entire run had to pass through. There was no cell service, no internet, just him and the river for 12 hour shifts. The drive out took 2 hours on a muddy access road that barely qualified as a trail. The tower sat about 20 feet above the water on steel posts driven deep into the riverbank. Inside was basic, a chair, a small table, weather protection, and that mechanical hand counter. It looked like something from the 1970s, all metal and springs with a reset button on the side. Every click advanced the number by 1. His first day, everything went perfectly. The salmon were running strong, bright red sockeye heading upstream to spawn. He counted 7,456 fish by the end of his shift. His fingers were sore from clicking the counter, his eyes tired from staring at the water. But he felt satisfied. This was good, honest work. The kind of data that actually mattered. The second day started the same way. A steady stream of salmon, mechanical clicking, numbers climbing. But when he finished his count at the end of 12 hours, something was wrong. The counter showed 7,457, but he had counted exactly 7,456 fish, the same number as yesterday. He knew because he'd been extra careful, even making tick marks on paper to double-check. One extra click had to be his mistake, but then he remembered something that happened around 2:47 p.m. He'd been watching a particularly large sockeye navigate the rapids when he heard the counter click behind him. He turned around, confused, because his hand wasn't near the button. The metal counter was sitting on the table, and he swore he heard it click by itself. At the time, he figured it was just the old mechanism settling or something. Metal expands and contracts, springs wear out. But now, looking at that extra number, he wasn't so sure. He found Elias's belongings still in the storage area under the tower. His rain gear, some canned food, and a small notebook wedged between 2 boards. Most of the pages were standard fish counts, but the last entry made his blood run cold. Day 14. Can't do this anymore. They're not all fish swimming up there. Stop counting the others. Don't let it get to 100,000. He checked the logbooks going back 10 years. Every single fish counter had recorded exactly one extra click per day, always at 2:47 p.m. Always just one extra, no matter what the daily total was. The third day, he set up his phone to record a video of the counter at exactly 2:47 p.m. The battery died at 2:46. He tried again the fourth day with a backup camera. It malfunctioned at 2:45. By the fifth day, he brought 3 cameras and positioned them at different angles around the counter. At 2:47 p.m., he watched the counter through all 3 camera viewfinders. The water looked normal. Salmon swimming upstream, nothing unusual. But the counter clicked anyway, advancing from 32:47 to 32:48, even though he hadn't seen a fish pass in over a minute. He reviewed the footage that night in his cabin. The camera showed nothing but empty water at the exact moment the counter advanced, but in the background audio, he could hear something that made him replay the video 20 times. A sound like footsteps in water, slow, deliberate against the current. The feeling of being watched started on day 8. Every time he looked up from the counter, he felt eyes on him from somewhere in the river, not from the forest or the shore, but from the water itself. Like something under the surface was studying his routine, learning his patterns. He found more of Elias's notes hidden inside the counter mechanism, loose pages covered with increasingly frantic handwriting. Day 5 saw shapes moving on the riverbed, too deep to make out clearly, but they were walking upright. Day 8 they saw me back. One looked up at the tower and waved. Day 12 counted 47 of them today. They move in formation like they're marching somewhere. On day 10, he decided not to count fish at all. He just sat in the tower and watched the water. The counter stayed at 0 all day until exactly 2:47 p.m. Then it clicked. Once. Just once, without any fish passing, without him touching it. But this time he was ready. He had brought polarized sunglasses to cut through the glare on the water's surface. At 2:47, he stared straight down into the river and saw something that shouldn't exist. A shadow walked along the bottom of the river. Human-shaped, human-sized, moving steadily upstream against the current, not swimming or floating, walking. The water was at least 15 feet deep at that point, but this thing was walking on the riverbed like it was solid ground. The next day, 3 shadows passed at 2:47 p.m. The counter clicked 3 times by itself. The day after that, 7 shadows, 7 clicks. They moved in single file, evenly spaced, heading upstream with purpose, like soldiers on patrol. An old Otna woman named Anna came by the tower on day 15. She was checking traditional fishing sites downstream and saw him watching the water intently. "You're counting more than fish," she said without introduction. "What do you mean?" He asked. "The Copper River has been taking payment since the big earthquake in 1964, she explained, still collecting what it's owed. She told him the 1964 earthquake had created underwater cave systems throughout the riverbed. Some of the local fishermen who went out that day never came back. Their boats were found empty, engines still running, anchored in calm water. The crews had just vanished, but according to the elder, they hadn't really vanished. They'd gone into the river and never come back out. Bodies underwater don't decompose the same way, she said. Cold water, no oxygen, they just keep walking." He followed the river upstream on his day off, hiking along the bank to see where the shadows were heading. About 5 miles up, he found something that wasn't on any map. A massive whirlpool in a section where the river should have been shallow. The whirlpool was perfectly round, maybe 50 feet across, spinning slowly but constantly. The water was so dark it looked black, and it pulled everything down into depths that seemed impossible. Branches, leaves, anything that fell in disappeared immediately. He watched for 2 hours and saw them, the shadows walking straight into the whirlpool, disappearing into its depths. But more kept coming from downstream, an endless procession heading for that dark water. They weren't swimming upstream to spawn like the salmon, they were going home. That night, he set up an underwater camera with a waterproof housing and lowered it into the river on a long cable. The footage he recovered changed everything. The shadows had faces, human faces with open eyes and moving mouths. They looked up at the camera as they passed, and their expressions were alert, aware, purposeful. These weren't corpses drifting with the current. They were people still conscious, still walking, still counting. He enhanced the audio from the underwater recording. Beneath the sound of rushing water, he could hear voices, dozens of voices, all counting in unison. 5847, 5848, 5849. One face in the footage made him drop the camera. It was Elias Vance, the previous counter. He'd been missing for 3 months, officially listed as a voluntary quit. But there he was, walking along the riverbed, his mouth moving in silent counting, his eyes fixed on something ahead. His reflection in the river started acting wrong on day 22. When he looked down at the water, his reflection would move when he was sitting still. It would turn its head to watch him, even when he was looking away. Sometimes he'd catch it in his peripheral vision, waving at him from the water's surface. The mechanical counter began malfunctioning more seriously. Some days it would count backwards, subtracting fish that had clearly passed upstream. When it reached 0, it kept going into negative numbers, -1, -2, -3, -15, -67. On days when the counter went negative, he started seeing shadows walking downstream instead of up. They emerged from the river at night, leaving wet footprints in the mud around his cabin. The footprints led directly to the base of his tower, up the ladder rungs, and stopped at his chair. They were still damp in the morning. He started coughing up river water despite never swimming or falling in. His lungs felt heavy, waterlogged, even when he was breathing normally. Every breath tasted like silt and fish scales. The salmon began acting strangely, too. Instead of swimming upstream in steady lines, they started swimming in circles, thousands of them, creating small whirlpools throughout the river. In the center of each whirlpool was a shadow person, standing with arms outstretched, somehow controlling the fish. That's when he understood the horrible truth. They weren't counting salmon runs. They were counting how many people the Copper River had taken over the decades. Every person who drowned, disappeared, or been pulled into those underwater caves. The counter wasn't measuring fish. It was taking inventory of the dead. And every fish counter eventually joined them, walking the riverbed forever, counting endlessly, part of the river's eternal census. On day 28, he woke up standing waist deep in the river, 3 miles downstream from his cabin. The counter was in his hand, and he'd been clicking it in his sleep. He had no memory of leaving his bed, getting dressed, or walking to the water. The counter showed an impossible number, 89,456, more than the entire salmon run for the season. But it wasn't counting fish anymore. It was counting every person who'd ever died in Alaska's waters, going back generations. The shadows surrounded him in the river, all former fish counters from decades past. He recognized some faces from old employee photos at the regional office. Elias stood directly in front of him, his skin gray-blue like drowned flesh. "Once you count them all, you become one of us," he said, his voice bubbling with river water. "We're almost done now, just a few more thousand to go." He fought his way back to shore, but his legs felt heavy and cold. His skin was taking on that same gray-blue color. The river was inside him now. He could feel every current, every fish, every shadow walking the bottom. He was becoming part of the system he'd been hired to monitor. He made it to his truck and started driving toward town, but he kept turning around. Something compelled him to go back to finish the count. The number needed to reach 100,000. After that, the census would be complete, and he could rest. He's writing this from his cabin, but his feet are in the water. The counter is in his hand, clicking automatically now. 99,997, 99,998, 99,999. The water is up to his knees, then his waist. He can see Elias and the others waiting for him in the deeper water, patient and still. 100,000. The clicking stops. He's walking deeper now. His name was Marco Diaz, and he had been running heavy equipment for 12 years. He started right out of high school with his uncle's construction company in Tucson, working his way up from flagman to operating million-dollar excavators. He had dug foundations in every kind of ground you could imagine: desert hardpan that breaks jackhammer bits, Louisiana swamp that swallows entire machines, Rocky Mountain granite that sparks when you hit it. He thought he'd seen it all. But what happened in July 2019 in Barrow, Alaska, changed everything he thought he knew about what's buried beneath our feet. Some things should never be disturbed. The job came through a contractor in Anchorage. They needed experienced operators for a rush project, a new medical clinic in Barrow, Alaska's northernmost town. It's a place of 4,400 people living right on the Arctic Ocean, where the sun doesn't rise for 65 straight days in winter. But July meant 24-hour daylight, perfect for construction work. The pay was incredible, triple his normal rate, plus housing and meals. 15 of them flew up from the lower 48. Barrow sits on permafrost that goes down hundreds of feet. The town exists because of oil money and government contracts. Everything costs 5 times the normal price because it all has to be shipped or flown in. A gallon of milk runs $12. The locals were friendly enough, mostly Inupiat families who have lived there for generations, but they kept their distance from the work site. The site was an empty lot where the old community center had burned down in 1987. Just packed gravel and weeds growing in the brief summer, but he noticed something odd right away. None of the local kids played there. In a town that small, kids play everywhere. When he asked their liaison, an older Inupiat man, he just shrugged and said, "Some places are better left alone." They started digging on July 15th. It was a beautiful Arctic summer day, with the temperature around 50 degrees F and no wind. He was running a CAT 320 excavator, the perfect machine for precision work in tough conditions. The first few feet were loose gravel and compressed earth, exactly what they expected. Then, at 4 feet, they hit permafrost. Now, permafrost in July usually looks like concrete mixed with ice chunks. It's tough to dig, but manageable if you take your time. This permafrost was different. It had perfect layers, each one exactly 18 inches thick, separated by thin black lines that looked like someone had drawn boundaries with a ruler. He had never seen anything like it in 12 years of digging. Natural permafrost forms gradually over thousands of years. You get rocks, soil, organic matter all mixed together in irregular patterns. This looked artificial, like someone had built it layer by layer. The first layer had normal stuff frozen inside: Red Bull cans, iPhone charging cables, McDonald's receipts dated 2019. Modern trash that could have blown in from anywhere. That made sense. Layer 2 looked older: Nokia phones, Blockbuster video rental cards, newspapers with headlines about September 11th, all from around 2001. Perfectly preserved in the ice like they'd been flash frozen yesterday. That's when things got weird. Layer 3 had newspapers dated July 2034, 15 years in the future. The headlines made no sense. President Garcia signs Mars Colony Act. Climate refugees reach 500 million worldwide. Tokyo Olympics cancelled due to heat dome. The technology frozen in there looked advanced, like nothing he'd ever seen. Phones without screens, some kind of contact lenses, devices he couldn't even identify. He called his foreman over. The foreman, a 20-year construction veteran who'd seen everything, stared at those future newspapers for a full minute without saying a word. Then he told Marco to keep digging and not to mention this to the other crews. Layer 4 snapped back to 1982. Atari game cartridges, Reagan campaign buttons, a Walkman still playing when they thought it out. The chronology made no sense. Why would older items be deeper than newer ones, except for that one future layer? Layer 5 showed the year 2057. He found his own driver's license in there. The photo showed him at 72 years old. Same name, same address in Tucson, but an old man's face he'd never seen before. The expiration date was 40 years away. His hands were shaking as he held that impossible license. That was his signature on it, but he'd never signed it. The picture showed his eyes, his nose, his mouth, just aged and weathered. How could something that didn't exist yet be frozen in permafrost? Layer 6 had World War II items, military rations, letters from soldiers, newspapers announcing Germany's surrender. All from 1945, 74 years old but looking fresh as yesterday. Layer 7 contained their obituaries. All 15 crew members died on various dates between 2089 and 2094. His read, Marco Diaz, 104, died Thursday at Barrow Memorial Hospital. Survived by wife Maria, children Roberto and Alina, and 7 grandchildren. He'd been married to his wife for 3 years. They had no kids. There was no Barrow Memorial Hospital. But somehow he was reading his own death notice from 70 years in the future. Layer 8 had Bronze Age tools, hammered copper, carved bone, stone axes. But Layer 9 jumped to the year 3045, with writing in languages that didn't exist and technology that looked more like art than machinery. Layer 10 had a human skull, perfect teeth, good bone density, looked maybe 30 years old. They ran the dental records through their company database as a joke. It matched the crane operator exactly. The crane operator was standing right next to him, very much alive. They kept digging. Every layer had more impossible things. Their construction equipment, rusted and broken like it, had been buried for centuries. The medical clinic they were building, already completed and then ruined. Bodies wearing their exact clothes, their jewelry, their tattoos. In Layer 20 he found himself, literally himself, frozen solid, maybe 25 years old, holding a note in his handwriting that said, "Don't dig past Layer 30. Marco, age 34. He wrote that exact note right then and placed it in the frozen Marco's hand, creating the paradox he just discovered. The ink was still wet when the permafrost claimed it. That's when the disappearances started. Workers would be there 1 minute, gone the next, not walking away, just suddenly not existing. But they'd find them in the deeper layers, fresh bodies in permafrost that had supposedly been frozen for decades or centuries. He realized they weren't digging through time. They were digging through every possible timeline at once. This spot existed in all realities simultaneously. Everyone who came here got scattered across different versions of history and the future. The black lines between layers weren't soil boundaries, they were the edges between parallel worlds. At Layer 25, they found themselves still digging, but they were also up on the surface watching themselves work. Multiple versions of the same crew, some young, some old, some dead, some not born yet. Different versions of Marco started talking to each other. Elderly Marco warned about Layer 30. That's where all timelines meet. Everyone dies there in every reality. But they couldn't stop digging. Their bodies moved without their control, like something was operating the machines through them. They found versions of the clinic from timelines where nuclear war happened. Another timeline where Alaska was a tropical jungle. Another where humans never evolved at all. Layer 29 contained every version of every person who'd ever stood on this spot. Millions of bodies, all aware, all screaming silently, trying to climb out but frozen in place forever. The weight of infinite timelines started collapsing reality. The ground cracked, different eras bleeding together. He saw dinosaurs walking past spaceships, ancient Inupiat hunters sharing the ice with robots from centuries ahead. Layer 30 wasn't permafrost, it was empty space, an absolute void where all possibilities began. The moment they breached it, time stopped making sense. Past, present, and future happened simultaneously. He watched himself being born, dying, working this job, never taking this job, becoming a teacher, a mechanic, a soldier. Infinite versions of Marco Diaz making infinite choices across infinite worlds. The construction site became everything at once: empty tundra, a thriving city, a nuclear wasteland, the ocean floor, a mountain peak, an endless void. All possibilities existing in the same space. Workers were pulled into their own timelines, scattered across every version of history. He grabbed the excavator controls as realities collapsed, watching Barrow cycle through Stone Age settlements, futuristic cities, and underwater ruins, all flickering like a broken television. He managed to climb out as the timelines reconverged, but he doesn't know which reality he returned to. The medical clinic stands completed now. It has been running for 20 years, according to the locals, but he remembers starting construction yesterday. The other 14 workers, official records show they never existed. No employment records, no social security numbers, no families looking for them. But sometimes he sees them in reflections or catches glimpses in photographs, working jobs in timelines that might be real. Time is broken in Barrow. He stayed in town, got a job at the oil facility, and married a local woman named Maria. They have 2 children, Roberto and Alina. Sometimes he finds old receipts in his pocket for things he hasn't bought yet, in stores that don't exist. The lot where they dug is empty again. The clinic exists and doesn't exist, depending on which timeline you're observing from. The locals still avoid it. They know some places connect to everywhere and everywhen, and most people aren't meant to see all their possible lives at once. He's 47 now, or maybe 31, or possibly 83. He checks his driver's license daily to see which age he is in this reality. Sometimes he remembers dying in that permafrost. Other times he remembers never coming to Alaska at all. If you ever get offered construction work in Barrow, Alaska, turn it down. Some foundations go deeper than any building needs, and some things buried in the earth are better left undisturbed. The ground remembers every possibility, and once you've seen all your lives spread out in frozen layers, you'll never be sure which one you're actually living. Her name was Isla Chen, and she worked as a cruise ship greeter at the Ketchikan dock for one summer that changed everything. She was 24, fresh out of college with a tourism degree, and this seemed like the perfect first job. Sunny days, happy tourists, good tips. What could go wrong? Ketchikan is this tiny town in Alaska with only 8,000 people. But every summer, it gets hit with over 1 million cruise tourists. That's crazy when you think about it. 5 massive ships dock there every single day from May through September. These aren't little boats, either. They're floating cities with 3,000 to 4,000 passengers each. Her job was simple. Stand at the dock wearing a traditional tea-lingot vest, smile at tourists, point them toward the shops on Creek Street, and answer basic questions. Where's the bathroom? How far is the totem park? What time does the ship leave? Easy stuff. The pay was decent, and she got to practice her customer service skills. But right from her first week in May 2022, she noticed something weird that nobody else seemed to care about. The docks were always chaos when ships arrived. Thousands of people would pour off these huge boats like ants, all excited to see authentic Alaska in their 4-hour stop. They'd flood the tiny downtown, buy overpriced salmon and souvenirs, take pictures by the creek, then hurry back before departure. Except some of them didn't hurry back. She started noticing it during her second week. She'd see groups of tourists walk off the ship, count them as they passed her station, then watch the ships pull away hours later. But her numbers never matched. People were missing, and nobody seemed to notice except her. At first, she thought maybe they were extending their stay. Ketchikan is beautiful. She couldn't blame them for wanting more time, but when she asked her supervisor about it, he just shrugged. Some tourists change their travel plans, he said. Not our problem as long as they don't cause trouble. But here's the thing, she called around to the hotels. None of them had any extended bookings. No tourists were checking in for extra nights. These people weren't staying in town, they were just gone. The missing tourists all had something in common, too. Before they vanished, they'd come up to her with this weird look in their eyes and ask the same question. Can you tell me about the old Ketchikan? Not historic Ketchikan, not early Ketchikan, the old Ketchikan, and when they asked, their eyes looked wrong. Their pupils were too big, like they were seeing things that weren't there. It gave her chills every time. She started paying closer attention. The pattern was exact, 7 people from every ship, never 6, never 8, always exactly 7, and they all walked the same route after asking about old Ketchikan. They'd head up Creek Street, past the old brothel museum, and disappear into the forest behind town. She decided to follow one group to see where they went. It was a Tuesday in late May. The Norwegian Star had just docked, and right on schedule, 7 passengers approached her. A family of 4, an elderly couple, and a young woman traveling alone, all with those strange, wide pupils. "Excuse me," the father said. "Can you tell us about the old Ketchikan?" She gave them directions to the museum, but instead of going there, she watched them walk up Creek Street in perfect formation. They didn't talk to each other or look around at the shops. They moved like they were following invisible instructions. She stayed back about 50 feet and followed them. They stopped at an old totem pole from 1892 near the edge of the forest. One by one, they touched it. The father first, then the mother, then each kid, then the elderly couple, then the young woman. They touched it in the exact same spot, like they'd done this before. Then they walked straight into the forest. Here's where it gets impossible to explain. The trees seemed to close behind them. Not like branches moving in the wind, the actual tree trunks shifted together like a door closing. The path they'd taken just disappeared. She ran to where they'd entered the forest, but there was nothing. A solid wall of trees, no path, no way through. It was like they'd walked into another world. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about those 7 people and how they'd just vanished. So she went to the library and started looking up old records about Ketchikan. What she found made her blood run cold. In 1900, Ketchikan had exactly 7,000 residents. The most recent census showed 8,000. It had grown by exactly 1,000 people over 122 years. But when she checked birth records, death records, and immigration data, the math didn't work. There weren't enough babies born or people moving there to account for that growth. So, where did those extra 1,000 people come from? She dug deeper into the historical records. That's when she found shipping manifests from the early 1900s that made no sense. They listed cruise ships docking in Ketchikan in 1898 and 1900, ships like the Queen Mary, which wasn't even built until 1936. The next day at work, she asked her supervisor if she could see the security footage from the docks. He thought it was weird, but let her into the little office where they kept the monitors. "We've got cameras going back about 15 years, he said, pulling up the computer. "What are you looking for?" "Just want to see the passenger counts," she lied. But when he pulled up footage from previous years, she saw something that made her question her sanity. The cameras showed ships docking at empty berths. Berths where no ships were visible, but the passenger manifests showed thousands of people disembarking from nothing. On the monitors, she could see crowds of people walking off invisible ships, becoming solid and visible only when they stepped onto the dock. They materialized out of thin air. "Do you see that?" she said, pointing at the screen. Her supervisor looked where she was pointing. "See what? That's just an empty berth." He couldn't see them. The invisible passengers were only visible on the security cameras. Over the next few weeks, she started recognizing some of these invisible passengers walking around downtown. They wore clothes from different time periods, 1950s dresses, 1920s suits, some in outfits that looked like they came from the future. They worked in the shops now, had taken jobs from locals, but nobody seemed to notice the change. Their credit cards worked, their money was real, but when she tried to look up their backgrounds online, nothing existed. No social media, no records, nothing. One day in early June, a tourist from what looked like the normal timeline approached her. But she was wearing clothes that seemed slightly off, familiar but wrong, like a movie costume of modern clothes. "Excuse me," the woman said, "has the merger happened yet?" "What merger?" Isla asked. The woman's face went white. "Oh God, you're still real." Then she looked around frantically. "What year is this?" 2022, Isla said. No, 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 the woman started backing away. "I'm in the wrong timeline. I need to get back to my ship." She turned and ran toward the forest path, but before she reached the tree line, she just disappeared, vanished into thin air. The only thing left was her purse dropped on the ground. Isla picked it up and looked inside. Her driver's license showed a Ketchikan address, but when she checked later, that street didn't exist in their town. That's when she realized the truth. Ketchikan wasn't just a cruise destination. It was some kind of port for ships from different timelines. The totem pole was an anchor point, keeping all these different versions of reality connected. Every cruise season, they were exchanging people with other timelines. Their tourists would disappear into the forest and end up in different versions of Ketchikan. Meanwhile, tourists from those other timelines would appear at their dock. She started getting up early to watch the sunrise over the harbor. At dawn, when the light hit the water just right, she could see them, dozens of ships that weren't supposed to be there. Massive vessels with impossible designs, some floating in the air above the water, others that looked like they were made of light. The exchange was getting faster. By mid-June, it wasn't 7 people per ship anymore. It was 14, then 21. Then entire tour groups would vanish into the forest while invisible crowds materialized at the dock. Downtown Ketchikan started changing. The same buildings existed in the same spots, but they were different versions of themselves. A saloon from the 1890s occupied the same space as a modern coffee shop, while a building that looked like it came from the future existed in the same location as the hardware store. She found herself serving coffee to 3 different versions of the same tourist from different decades, and none of them could see the others. The breaking point came on June 15th. 5 cruise ships arrived at the same time, but only one was from their timeline. The other 4 were from different versions of history. Thousands of temporal tourists flooded downtown, all looking for different versions of Ketchikan that existed in their timelines. The buildings started shifting and changing to match each group's expectations. And then something happened to her. She started existing in all the timelines at once. She could see young Isla from the 1990s, current Isla from 2022, and old Isla from some future timeline, all working the same dock, greeting tourists from the past, present, and future simultaneously. The totem pole, their anchor point, began to crack. She could hear it groaning like old wood under pressure. All the timelines were bleeding together permanently. July 4th, 2022, was the last normal day she remembers. After that, Ketchikan existed in every moment of its history at the same time. Walking through downtown, you'd age and get younger depending on which temporal zone you entered. The 1890s saloon district made you grow a beard and speak differently. The future district gave you knowledge of technologies that hadn't been invented yet. The cruise ships still come, but now they never leave. They're stuck in eternal docking loops, arriving over and over again from different timelines. She quit her job, but it didn't matter. She's still there, greeting infinite tourists as every version of herself that ever existed. She's 15-year-old Isla getting her first summer job. She's 24-year-old Isla discovering the truth. And she's 80-year-old Isla who's seen every possible timeline. If you ever take a cruise to Ketchikan, you'll see her at the dock, all versions of her. And you'll see every version of yourself, too, every choice you've made, every path you've taken, every possible life you could have lived. Just don't ask about the old Ketchikan. Because once you do, your eyes will change, your pupils will grow wide, and you'll join the 7 who walk into the forest. And there's always room for 7 more. His name was Ethan Cole, and he had been working security for 12 years. He started small, doing mall patrols and office buildings in Anchorage, then worked his way up to industrial sites. He got his level 3 certification and even did some armed transport jobs. He had handled drunk workers, equipment thieves, and more than a few emergencies that would make most people quit. But what happened during his 3 months at the Valdez Marine Terminal changed everything he thought he knew about this job. Some places aren't just dangerous, they're hungry. The Valdez Marine Terminal is where Alaska's oil pipeline ends. It's massive, over 1,000 acres of tanks, pipes, and loading docks where supertankers fill up with crude oil from Prudhoe Bay. The town of Valdez itself has maybe 4,000 people, rebuilt completely after the 1964 earthquake destroyed the original settlement. Everything there feels temporary, like the ground might swallow it all again. He was hired for the night watch, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. 12 hours of monitoring the terminal while the day crew slept. The pay was good, really good, which should have been his first warning. Nobody pays that much for routine security work. The terminal manager, Bill Peterson, gave him the tour on his first day. Dozens of storage tanks, each one holding over 500,000 barrels of crude oil, miles of pipeline connecting everything, security cameras covering every angle, a radio system with direct lines to the Coast Guard and the fire department. Tank 7's been offline for maintenance, Peterson mentioned as they walked past it. Don't worry about that one, just make sure nobody gets too close. Tank 7 looked the same as the others from the outside, a massive steel cylinder maybe 8 stories tall, painted white with red numbers. But something felt wrong about it. The air around it was colder. His radio crackled with static whenever he got within 50 feet, and even the seagulls avoided flying over it. His first week was exactly what he expected. Patrol the perimeter fence every 2 hours, check IDs of late workers, monitor the security cameras from the control room, write reports about absolutely nothing happening. The other guards warned him about boredom being the biggest enemy on the night shift. They were wrong. It started with sounds from Tank 7. Not the normal settling noises you get from metal structures cooling down at night. These were voices. Thousands of them, all talking at once, but muffled like they were underwater. He checked the maintenance logs. Tank 7 hadn't been pumped or filled in over 6 months. It should have been silent. The voices got clearer each night. Sometimes he could almost make out words, but in languages he'd never heard before. Old languages, ancient languages. He started timing his patrols to avoid that section of the terminal, but the sounds followed him. His radio would pick up whispers when he was nowhere near Tank 7. The security cameras started showing people climbing the ladder on the tank's side, but when he looked with his own eyes, the ladder was empty. He pulled the camera footage to double-check. It was clear as day, workers in old Alaskan pipeline uniforms from the 70s and 80s climbing up Tank 7. He recognized some of the faces from memorial photos in the break room, workers who had died in industrial accidents over the years. But according to the timestamp, this footage was from last Tuesday. Every single person on those cameras had been dead for decades. The worst part was what they did when they reached the top. They'd look down into the tank and their faces would change. Terror, then relief. Then they'd jump in and disappear. The oil level never changed, though. He checked the dipstick readings every night, always the same. Exactly 347,000 barrels. That's when he made his first big mistake. He climbed up to look inside Tank 7 himself. The oil wasn't black like it should have been. It was darker than black, like looking into empty space. And it wasn't reflecting his face when he shone his flashlight down. Instead, he saw hundreds of other faces looking up at him. Men, women, even children, all floating just under the surface, all mouthing words he couldn't hear, all reaching upward with hands that almost broke through the surface tension. He dropped his dipstick into the oil to check the depth. The moment it touched the surface, the oil started climbing up the stick like it was alive, thick black liquid flowing upward against gravity, reaching for his hand. He yanked the stick back so fast he nearly fell off the platform. The oil sample in the container moved on its own, forming shapes, hands pressing against the glass, faces that looked familiar, letters that spelled out HELP over and over again. He took it to the lab for analysis, telling them it was a routine maintenance check. The results came back 3 days later. The lab tech looked confused when she handed him the report. "This is weird, Ethan. Your oil sample has organic compounds that don't make sense. DNA markers, human DNA markers, like this oil used to be. People." He started asking questions around the terminal. The older workers would clam up when he mentioned Tank 7. Finally, an old-timer who'd been there since the pipeline opened pulled him aside. "That tank's been trouble since day one," the man said. "Back in '89, they were drilling a new site up north and hit something that wasn't on any geological survey. It was already refined, already processed, like it had been underground for millions of years, waiting." The other guards started reporting problems, too. Shadows moving in their peripheral vision. Footsteps on the metal catwalks when nobody else was around. Equipment failures that maintenance couldn't explain. But the worst discovery came during his 4th week. The terminal's automated pump system activated at exactly 3 a.m. every night. He could hear the pumps running, see the pressure readings change on the control panel, but no ships were loading. So where was it going? He traced the pipeline network with his flashlight. Tank 7 was connected to the main distribution system, and oil was flowing out of it every night, flowing into the other tanks, contaminating them. The black liquid was spreading through the entire terminal like an infection. Workers who handled oil from the contaminated tanks started having the same nightmares, drowning in thick black liquid while voices spoke in languages they didn't understand. But these weren't dreams. They were memories. Memories from the people who'd become the oil millions of years ago. He found the geological reports that the company had tried to bury. The 1989 drill site wasn't unusual rock formations. It was a mass grave. Thousands of bodies from some ancient civilization, liquefied under pressure and time. They'd been conscious in that oil for millions of years, aware but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die. The pipeline gave them hope, a way to spread, a way to find new hosts. His blood tests started showing hydrocarbon levels that shouldn't exist in living humans. His veins were carrying crude oil instead of just blood. Normal exposure, nothing to worry about. But he was changing. The voices from Tank 7 stopped being frightening. They were welcoming. Offering immortality. He learned the truth about the original Valdez, too. The earthquake in 1964 didn't destroy the town. The oil did, seeping up from underground reservoirs, converting the residents one by one until there was nothing left but empty buildings and black stains on the ground. Peterson, the terminal manager, finally told him everything. "It's not malicious," Peterson said, his eyes now completely black like the oil. "They just want to live again, to be part of the world instead of trapped underground." By his 10th week, half the terminal workers were more oil than human. They thought collectively now, sharing memories that went back millions of years. The tankers leaving Valdez weren't just carrying oil anymore. They were carrying them, liquefied and aware, spreading to gas tanks and engines worldwide. He felt himself dissolving during his last few shifts, becoming liquid during the darkest hours of night, seeping into cracks in the concrete, flowing through the pipeline network, testing what it felt like to be oil. He's writing this during his final solid hours. He can feel the petroleum calling to him, pulling him down into Tank 7, where he belongs, where they all belong. The conversion is almost complete, and he's not fighting it anymore. The beautiful thing is how far they've spread. If you've ever stopped at a gas station that carries oil from the Alaska pipeline, they're already inside your car, in your garage, seeping into your home's foundation, waiting patiently for you to join them. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt. The merger is actually peaceful, like falling asleep and waking up as part of something infinitely larger and older and wiser than anything you've ever imagined. Welcome to the collective. Welcome to immortality. Welcome to the black tide that connects us all.